Hi, welcome to the Trauma Thrivers podcast. Delighted to have you with us. I'm Lula Bentz, your host, a psychotherapist, a trauma expert, and a survivor myself. Lovely to have you with us. The Trauma Thrivers podcast is for anybody who has been through any sort of developmental trauma or who has complex PTSD. This podcast aims to help educate, inspire, and support those of us that are on a trauma healing journey. We've got stories, steps, and various solutions to trauma to help you heal. If you'd like more information or tips or tools or strategies, please go to traumathrivers.com. You can also find this podcast on my YouTube channel, Lula Bentz Trauma Thrivers. If you'd like to join our community of thrivers, please find us on Facebook under Trauma Thrivers. Chiron Clinics proudly sponsors the Trauma Thrivers podcast. Chiron Clinics offer residential and outpatient treatment for anyone trying to recover from the effects of trauma. Chiron's clinics look through the lens of trauma to treat common mental health problems and behavioural disorders, which can lead to self-harming, addictions, depression, anxiety, and relationship issues. All treatment protocols used at Chiron Clinics use the latest research on trauma in the brain as a guide, and the combination can be highly effective in restoring nervous system regulation. For more information, see chironclinics.com. Hi Trauma Thrivers, welcome back. Today I'm delighted to introduce you to Mark Escott. Mark is the CEO and co-founder of Life Chance. And Life Chance Education work with children who have experienced trauma and also the professionals who support them. Mark's personal and professional journey give him an absolute unique insight into working with vulnerable children, as you'll go on to hear. A difficult childhood saw Mark experiencing many of the challenges and adverse childhood experiences that are so common amongst the children he works with. His decision to found School for Inspiring Talents and Life Chance Education was driven by a commitment to transform the life chances of young people and their families. And he is doing just that. And for that reason, I am delighted to introduce him to Trauma Thrivers Group and you today, and to get him to tell us a little bit about himself and his story.
Oh, thank you, Lou. Thank you for inviting me on today. It was lovely to chat last week. We talked about so much, and when you said today, like, what should we talk about? So yeah. So first of all, for the people who are watching and listening, so my name's Mark Escott, as Lou said. I'm the CEO and co-founder of an organisation called Life Chance. We're a therapeutic education provider that specialises in working with young people and families who have experienced trauma. So we're committed to transforming the life chances of the young people and families we work with.
Just for the audience and viewers, I think, as far as I remember, you're the only real place in the UK that kind of does the work that you do.
Yeah, there's not that many schools like ourselves, let's say. So the organisation is called Life Chance, and we have Life Chance Education, which runs our schools, and the schools are called School for Inspiring Talents.
Wonderful.
They have therapeutic schools. So we have two sites there. There's between 40 and 50 students maximum in the schools. And then we also have Life Chance Care, which is our therapeutic team. So that's headed up by our consultant clinical psychologist, Dr. Belfield. We've got speech and language therapists, education specialists, the team manager, Jules works for us. There's trauma recovery practitioners that we work with. We've got Blue, our therapy dog.
Oh, amazing.
Amazing team. So they work across our own schools.
Okay.
And then we look at supporting the community as well through Life Chance training and consultancy. And that does exactly what it says on the tin. We go out and deliver training to multi-professional audiences. around the impact of trauma and how schools can become more trauma informed. And we're one of a handful of therapeutic schools like this in the UK, but there's not that many. We're a day school. So one of the reasons why I set this up was there's residential schools that deal with support therapeutically. So a lot of the young people that I was working with in Devon were not being able to fit into mainstream education. The trauma they'd experienced and displaying challenging behaviour. So they were being sent out of county to go into residential schools. And then, so they were in some of these young people had been adopted by some lovely families. They were in really secure foster homes, care homes. They were living with parents who have had their issues, but were working through it successfully. They were being taken away from these secure homes.
No, the last thing you want to do.
Day school. With that. And so the main driver of why I set up Life Chance and School for Inspiring Talents was I am and was one of these young people myself.
Absolutely.
I'm a trauma thriver, like a lot of the people listening to this today as well. So that was something that really meant a lot to me, was inventing a school that wasn't available for me when I was a young man.
And not available, sadly, as yet, until you go nationwide, of course, to many other young people who are being ostracized or sent away from school due to conduct, due to kind of trauma. So we're not treating the trauma, which is what you guys are doing, which is amazing.
And it's exactly that. So it's like, I think there will always be a need for maybe some schools like mine.
Yes.
We're starting to notice that this can be done in more mainstream schools, and that's our mission, is to actually spread the word and help other schools to become more trauma aware.
So
we can become so schools become more trauma healing environments.
I love it.
We work with lots of young people who've experienced severe trauma, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, domestic violence, drug and alcohol abuse at quite a high level. But as we know, there are lots of people that experience traumatic events that with the right support, the right care, and the right, emotionally available adults around them, coaching them through these processes, we could help them. As a young person, it's how you make meaning of this.
Absolutely.
Because my own childhood was a mixture of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse as a young boy. And not understanding it. What I realize now is, as that young boy, I had no one to talk to. No one listened to me. Really didn't believe what was going on. I didn't know how to share it. So I internalized it. And the only thing I could figure out as a young child was I must have been doing something wrong. It must have been my fault.
Yes. Because that's what we do think as children, don't we? We can't blame anybody else. We can't make our parents the wrong or in the wrong, because that would just be too terrifying for most children. So we do take it out against ourselves and make that's where we get our belief system about who we are in the world. And of course, I guess it all goes downhill from then.
And that belief system, that life script that we create. I remember being very early creating a life script that I'm bad and wrong. And there was something wrong with me. And it's like, and then if people, I was even then told, look at the perpetrators, and with myself, it's like, if you tell anyone, you'll be made wrong, you'll be told off. So you start to believe that yourself. And it's like, so there is something wrong with me. And you're seeing more and more. And then there was a conversation I had with someone a few years ago, and they're talking about trauma, and you're going to open up a can of worms, and you can't talk about it. And I was going, well, actually, I disagree, because no one talked to me, I internalized it, and the meanings I had weren't good. I made it mean I was bad and wrong, and I was a naughty boy. That became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Of course it did. Course it did.
So I don't have very good memories of being in school myself. I don't think any of my teachers actually believe that I now work in a school, and let alone run
no.
the life of Sundays. There used to be a joke in my family that I used to get dressed up in my suit to go to work, and they believed I went to a cafe all day and pretended, because I was excluded from school. And then I ended up in the criminal justice system.
Okay, did you? How old were you then when that happened?
I was 18 years old.
Okay.
I was but I started using drugs to numb all this stuff out, you know, drugs and alcohol over the time. I was started at 12.
Yeah.
You know,
Do
and
you know,
then,
it's so often that I hear, and in all my years in addiction services and also with myself, you know, that already by 11, 12, 13, 14, you're already on the addictive path trying to numb out. So
yeah,
what happened to you, Mark? What was
I think it was,
your experience? Did you start with smoking or
yeah,
drinking
smoking
or?
cigarettes as a, you know, and then drinking. I remember my parents would have parties, and I remember coming down on a Sunday morning, and my first experience was taking cigarettes out of the ashtray and smoking them,
Wow.
drinking beer out of the bits of beer that were left in cans, and experiencing that, and then going on to you know, smoking weed. And I think, like say, you know, when you're that young and you're experimenting, you naturally gravitate to older children, because, you know, I needed older children to get me the booze, get me my pot. So by the time I was 14, 15, that was happening. Then again, I started to then do the same. I was then
Yeah.
into selling drugs and alcohol, and then violence was quite a big part for me. I was a very angry young man.
I'm not
Getting into
surprised.
fights and football violence and things like that was a way out of numbing myself. I don't
Yeah.
think I realized at the time, though. I didn't have the vocabulary back then to realize what I was doing.
No.
And then by the time I was 18, I ended up living in a hostel for young men on probation, serving a 2-year suspended prison sentence for theft
Crikey.
and a few other things. I was on the run, you know, and like I say, I'm really sad. There were 6 of us, and there's only 2 of us still alive today.
What, 6
Um,
of you siblings?
no, sorry, 6 of us lived in this hostel, 6 young men,
Oh, okay.
and then there was only 4 of us alive.
Oh,
The rest have died through suicide and drug overdose. And sadly, through my work, I did some work about 12, 13 years ago in a hostel, which is very similar to what I lived in. And there was this young boy living there, and then his dad turned up on a Sunday, and it happened to be this other boy I lived in the hostel. So that
how?
realization that I started to see the intergenerational
Yeah.
impact of trauma and abuse,
Yeah.
and it started to hit home then. It was like, oh my God, you know, so he was repeating that, and I was
Yes.
repeating that. So, but it was a very powerful part of my life. I remember I was on probation. I was coming to the end of my 2-year probation order. I started to do some voluntary work with a charity, and my probation officer was, I wanted to go and do an NVQ in social care, and he actually told me he didn't think I was clever enough.
Oh,
It was a
gosh.
bit like a red rag to a bull.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not the sort of person you say you can't do that. So I did train, and in a way he was right, because I never completed it because it was a bit difficult, but that was for lots of reasons. But he then asked me what I wanted to do next in life. And I sort of, you know, and I explained to him that I wanted to do his job. And he asked me why, because I said, well, actually, you're and I realized that I told him I could read books on his topic. I could learn to do him, but he could never learn to be me. He
Yeah.
hadn't had lived experience. And the conversation was a bit rougher than that, with a few more fruity words, Lou, because I didn't have the vocabulary I have now. But I realized that I wanted to make a change to the system at
Right.
each level, from the people receiving it to those creating it to those delivering it. You know,
Yeah.
and that's what I wanted to go out. And I said I wanted to be a translator.
Right.
I realized that I could learn his language, but he couldn't learn mine. And
Yeah.
that's what I set out to be, was a translator. And then, struggled for quite a few years trying to train, because I was still suffering with addiction.
Okay. Yeah. When did the addiction how did you crack that nut?
I see it like a bit like a pendulum, Lou. I was on this pendulum, and it would swing like one way to the other, and I'd do quite well, and I was succeeding. I'd start to do some work. I was training as a drugs worker as well, and a youth worker, because I wanted to be this translator.
Yes.
It would go really well, and then I'd use more, relapse, and I was using cocaine by this time. I was a cocaine addict.
Okay.
Mostly sniffing, but smoking crack as well. Very pleasant. And there was this moment, like through my 20s, where I'd be doing well, not doing well, like a pendulum. And I just remember having this realization. I was at a party in Brighton. I was living in Brighton at the time, working as a youth worker, street-based youth worker. And I was telling someone at the party about the work I do, you know, whilst smoking a crack pipe, yeah? And thinking that I was the coolest person in the world in my 20s, living in Brighton, party scene. and expected them to tell me how bloody great I was, you know, coked out my head, ego the size of a house. And this person looked at me with utter disgust and went, so you're a professional hypocrite. And that moment of them saying that to me, there was, and then again, it was like, I realized that on the next upswing of the pendulum in the positive direction, I had to let the hell go. Because if I didn't let go then, I don't think I'd ever would have.
Yes.
So it was that sort of realization. And, you know, I was in my late 20s, I think about 29 by this time. And I realized I had to give up cocaine. And so I found, you know, I found recovery meetings and that, but I did some private therapy and some coaching.
Okay.
And I remember looking around my life and looking back as you do in recovery, you know, and just realizing that my school years weren't that great, you know, and it wasn't that great, and I didn't enjoy school, and realized that if I'd had some people around me that could help me, life would have been a bit different.
Yes.
So I made a declaration to the coach I was working with, life coach, and I told them that I was going to be an unstoppable stand for the transformation of the education system, that I was going to transform the education system and it would need to be more healing.
Right.
And then they were like, but you've never done that. And I was like, well, I'm going to do it, you know, and I was in recovery. And then we had this amazing conversation around integrity. And that was a really powerful moment for me because I didn't understand what the word meant. And when I asked my coach and she told me what integrity meant, I was like, oh shit, I don't have any of that. That was like, oh my God, that's scary stuff. So we had this interesting conversation that if I was to share my story with the world, what would happen if I triggered people and they didn't like it and they wanted to talk about it, but because some of my crimes that I was talking about were unsolved, so I could have still been arrested.
Okay.
So that was scary. So I don't know where it came from. You know, in early recovery, your brain's all over the place.
Yep.
And I decided in this crazy moment that the only way to get my integrity back in was I was going to hand myself into the police for every crime I'd ever committed.
Right.
I still to this day don't quite know why I did this. I say it was the early days of recovery. Worked with my coach, and I went to the police station and spoke to the man behind the desk, and he didn't quite understand me. Then 2 CID officers came out and they took me inside and I told them what I was doing. I think they thought I was absolutely crazy. And I ended up filling in 3 sheets of A4 paper with all the different things I'd done in my life. It's a sort of long story short, it took 3 months to look into it.
Right.
At the end, they kept going back to me and asking me questions and came back to it. And then I got a phone call asking me to meet the chief of police. So I went and met with him, and that was scary because it's a police training college as well.
Yeah.
And they asked me why I was doing it. I explained that I wanted to make a difference to my community, and I was turning my life around. And I was looking at, I could have done 10 years for the crimes, but we had a conversation around my integrity again. And he was basically really I wanted to be a man of my word. And it was like, basically, if I gave him my word that I wouldn't commit any more crime and I would go out and succeed on my promise to transform the education system. And then that's what I did. And I gave my word to the chief of police, and I wasn't prosecuted. And I went out and, I've done that. And that was a massive turning point, bit crazy story. And I tell some people still don't believe me that I did it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing story. Amazing. So you put down all the coke and the crack and everything else. And then when did you discover that it was trauma that was driving it all?
Yeah, I think so. A bit later, I really got to see a bit later that, the first gateway drug for me was trauma. It wasn't the cigarettes or the alcohol or stuff. It was trauma. So I, because I committed to working in the education system. I'd done a lot of youth work and drugs work, as I said in the past. And this amazing opportunity came up to work in a school when I was 30 years old. So I'm 48 now. And it was to set up a sort of pilot project for working with young people and mentoring them who were children of danger of being excluded.
Okay.
So I started to do that piece of work and continued in that school, went to another school to set up a project. And I was then seconded into a mental health CAMS team. That's child and adolescent mental health services.
Yes.
So I trained under that team to become a child and adolescent behaviour specialist. And there was a moment where I'd found some research by some American doctors. I looked at their names here because my memory's shot. So it's Dr. Vincent Fratelli and Dr. Robert Ander, who did a study on ACEs. And ACEs was an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences.
Yes.
And when I saw that word, adverse childhood experiences, it really hit home. I started to look at that ACE study and realized they started looking at naming ACEs, as in physical abuse, sex abuse, lots of things that you could name as an ACE.
Yes.
And they started to look at an ACE score.
Yes.
If you had, and I think like nearly half the population have at least one ACE.
Yes, they do.
And 20% have at least 2 ACEs. And then when you get into having 3 or 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, the more you're like, the likelihood of becoming a drug addict goes up by 14%.
Yes,
having mental health issues by the same. You're 3 times more likely to be excluded from school.
Yeah.
And it was like a light bulb moment, Lou. I just saw my entire life flash in front of me. And at that moment, I realized there was nothing wrong with me. It's what happened to me.
Yeah.
And it was such a relief. It was such a healing moment.
Yes.
It was the start of the journey of loving myself.
Yeah.
Forgiving myself for some of the things I've done in the past.
I mean, I'm completely with you on the ACE study and the scoring. And I think too, it's a light bulb moment for me and you and a lot of people that I work with. Some people that I've read find that it's stigmatizing to give yourself that label. But actually, I think the pros of the ACE study and seeing those kind of questions outweigh the negatives, if you like.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, the ACE study and the scoring isn't a diagnosis.
No.
I think if you get attached to you're giving yourself a diagnosis, I can understand how people think. But as a sort of a guideline or, to show you what's happened.
Yes.
And give you access to, because I think you then need to go further down the rabbit hole and start exploring yourself in whichever therapeutic technique that is, and the thing about, I talk about therapy, I remember once working in these schools, this young boy talked about therapy and he gave me the best definition of my job as a therapist. So I talked about what I was doing, we were talking with him and he just stopped and paused and then looked at me and went, "So this therapy shit you do," then he went, "is it just common sense with long words?" And I was like, that's the best definition I've ever heard of being a child behavioural therapist.
Oh, that's brilliant.
But it just in that way, it was around just being able to go down and explore different things and look at myself.
Yes.
And look at the impact. And yeah, it's a lifetime journey. I'm not a finished product.
I don't think anybody is.
No, none of us are. And I'm still dealing with stuff today. But that insight of it, like I say, I think it can be a bit crude.
Yeah.
I can understand what people get. So I look at the ACE score. So I think I can give myself an ACE score. I think it's about 8.
Is
8
it?
or 9, and then it's like, oh shit, how am I still alive?
Yeah.
But then also, for me, it went beyond that to then look at the meaning that we had, that we understand with trauma. It's a lot about the meaning we add to it.
Yes.
It's not a single event. It's not the event that caused you trauma. It's how that makes you feel. How you
yes.
Two different people could have the same experience.
And it's the reaction, isn't it, within us rather than what happens outside of us. So, we've all got different nervous systems and we've all got different transgenerational or intergenerational trauma. And we've all got a certain robustness that comes from our attachment. But if there's a lack of attachment or bonding, plus all the event trauma on top, that leads to a very dysregulated system.
Exactly. And I said earlier on, like that young boy that worked in the hostel, when I saw the intergenerational trauma, I really got to see it in my own life and my own family.
Yeah.
And that gave me access to not blaming anymore. I'm not saying it's right what some of people did, but the thing of being able to understand a bit more of this intergenerational trauma, how the epigenetics of this thing of
yes,
what had gone on, and that we're all victims. Just seeing that we're a traumatized civilization.
We are completely
going on, and like we said about the central nervous system, the trauma is this trauma in me was it was as deep as my bones.
Yes.
You know, I thought for some of the addiction work that I did, it was about looking at mental health issues and what's in my head. There's something wrong with me, and realized that it's a lot deeper than that. It's not in my head, you know. And then say looking at all the attachment stuff and just being able to start to piece that together.
Yes.
To start to heal.
Yes.
And then go beyond healing and then sort of thriving. And it was like, you know, so that whole journey for me of self-discovery, and then it really linked into that promise that I'd made to transform the education system, and realized that if we could make the education system more therapeutic, because I say I worked in drug addiction, so I worked in social care, I then worked in education, and then I worked in health and mental health. So I realized I'd learned to speak 3 different languages of health education, and mental health. So it was around if I could take those learnings and put them in a school. And the reason I chose a school was I thinking, you know, looking at the company Life Chances, looking at transforming the life chances of our communities. Where better than to be a heart of a community than in a school?
Yeah.
And if you could have social workers and mental health workers and trauma specialists working in a school, that's what would be the best place. And that's where Life Chance and School for Inspiring Talents came from. And so that was 10 years ago nearly.
Yes.
My friend and a couple of my colleagues, Judith Johnson, who I work with as a co-founder, and Dave Strudwick, we had a conversation around this. And it took about 3 years to get the funding, because I didn't fit into any box, Lou. This is the thing. I kept trying to get funding and no one quite understood what the hell I was talking about, because you want to work with naughty children, challenging behavior. It's like, no, that's just behavior is just a communication of unmet need.
Yes.
I don't want to name or label that. So it took a while for people to get, and to say there's been a huge shift in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, trauma informed seems to be coming in much, much more, and people are kind of getting it. Yeah,
it's lovely. Because I say there's 7 years, so 3 years to get the funding. So the school's now in its 7th year.
Amazing.
So the first 3 years, it was really tough.
Yeah.
And people not getting what we were doing. But now it's really thriving. There are lots of people who, you know, want to work alongside us, support us.
Yeah.
You know, say from the school, we really developed the therapeutic team. So that's on site, because as we know, it's all about relationships.
Totally.
You know, so these young people, you know, they work with a speech and language therapist, they work with an occupational therapist. So in that film, we'll do like a timeline. So we know, for instance, as an example, so my head's got a bit numb. So language patterns, maybe we'll start to come involved in it with a child, but 18 months starting to make noises. The child's be able to say a few more words of mummy and daddy, put sentences together. If there's an impact in the family, looking at drugs and alcohol, for an example, we know there's an interruption in that child's psychological development. So we'll impact their speech and language.
Of course.
Development. So by working with our speech and language therapists, with our occupational therapists, by tracing back when this trauma happened, we can then start to fill in the gaps.
Lovely.
And then, because a lot of these young people don't have a baseline for learning.
No, of course.
Because again, if you don't trust your primary carer, you're not going to trust a teacher.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes with education, it's like, oh, turn up at school and do what we tell you and trust us, and you have to respect us. It's like, actually, there needs to be a mutual respect, and these young people need a bit more care. And I think what's happening now is what we did 7 years ago was seen as very specialist, and it was for these young people who experience high-level trauma. We're now seeing that this approach could be used in mainstream settings, because we are all traumatized on some level.
Yes.
So, someone asked me about, I can sum it up as it's about just loving people.
Yeah.
Like being kind and caring to people as well.
Yes.
There's all the science to go, but for me, it's the whole trauma movement, trauma recovery movement, is the science of love and the science of hope.
Yes.
Because we know the plasticity of the brain and how much we can heal. So we have. So children can come to our school from as early as 5 years old, and they can stay with us up to the age of 16, year 11.
Great.
But one of the systems, you can't join us over the age of 12.
Right.
So the theory being that we would need a minimum of 3 years to work with someone. So we give ourselves 4, because it wouldn't be unfair to take a 15-year-old, unpack the trauma and go, I'm really sorry.
No, awful. I agree with you.
So there's all that. So now we've only just last July, because of that that system, had our first young person who graduated.
Oh, wow.
So, and he graduated. He's now gone on to college to study drama.
Great.
And that's so we are starting to see the impact of this, of working with these young people therapeutically, overcoming and healing. We
I
talk
love
about
it.
that we are a trauma recovery school.
Yes. And I wish, Mark, that we could get you in trauma recovery schools throughout the country, throughout the world, throughout everything, because what a difference it would make. So lastly, just to wrap up, what is it for you now? Where's the future for you? Where are you heading?
I think for me, it's around, there's a lot of handing over what I'm doing now. The team has grown from, say, 7 years ago, we had 8 students and we just had 3 staff. There's now, over 60 students, and we have capacity to take up to 100 if we need to, but the staff team has grown to 80.
Crikey.
So it's around working in partnership with other agencies and people to look at working together to create systems that can transform these young people's amazing lives. So for me, there's a lot of, I'm going through a process of handing over, and it's like my baby. It's like, it's grown so quick. It's gone through its teenage years and it's leaving home now, which is really exciting. So for me, the development of life chance training and consultancy is the next bit I'm focusing on. So we can actually train other people in what we're doing. And then also not just what we're doing, but create a system where we can bring in a lot more associates, because this is so new that we're not experts. I really talk about that I'm having an inquisitive inquiry. I'm not an academic. I've just explored for myself, for my own healing, shared what I know, and it just naturally has taken pace and people have come together. So it's around creating more of a community, of a trauma healing community. This is why I love the Trauma Thrivers. It's like, building part of connecting with people like yourself and your listeners to create a bigger community where we can keep sharing our stories, how we heal, be there to support each other. And one of the sort of campaigns that we run is called TNT. Trauma needs talking about, exploding the myth of talking about trauma. And that's one of the headings of one of the trainings. So that's the next stage. And we're now setting up the Life Chance Trust. So our students leave at 16. I say our first one's just left. And then the trust is now to continue to work with young people from 16 up to the age of between 28 and 30, knowing that from a psychological point of view and neuroscience point of view, our brains don't sort of finish developing to
25, 26.
Girls a bit earlier, boys a bit later. Quite often a lot of my female friends tell me that's crap, that their husbands are 50 and they still haven't matured. And my wife probably tell you that too. But it's around that we can still work with people and teach life skills and then help and mentor them through this age of their life. So and then just see what, and then open it up to other people to come and share with us what they're doing.
Yeah, that's great.
Let's say it's not a finished product. I think we ever will be. I don't know what it will look like, but hopefully that we can just talk more openly about trauma. And that we can all support each other to heal.
Yeah, that would be my wish too. And if people want to find out more, I know that you've got a book out at the moment. I don't know whether you can wave that at the screen.
I can wave that. I can wave the book. So I have a book, So One More Life Chance, How to Support the Journey from Trauma to Transformation. So that tells a little bit more about my backstory, and it will go in a bit more detail about the things that happened to me as a child, what the impact was like, and that journey. And there's some case studies in there from the school that we work at. It talks about the philosophy. If people want to know a little bit more about the ACE study and what adverse child experiences are and how they impact young people, you can read a bit more about that. Book, or visit our website, which is lifechance.org.uk.
All right, brilliant.
We'd love to hear what people are up to, and you can see a lot more there about what we're doing, what the schools are doing, and training courses that we've got coming up as well. So,
and I hope in the future, now that we've connected even more, and I really hope this was helpful for the Trauma Thrivers audience, that we're going to keep helping and supporting each other, hopefully, on our journeys. And anything I can do, I think what you're doing is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
And the stories being shared in Trauma Thrivers Facebook group is really helpful, because I'm here today, sat in front of you in my office, talking about all the positives, and I'm feeling really good today. But there are moments when I think all of us know that it's not always like this.
No.
So for myself, the continuation of being part of that group and reading people's stories like yours the other day and realizing that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Really helpful. So keep sharing everyone in the group.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And lovely to have you in that group as well, and your experience. And thank you for sharing it with us today, because it's very touching and there's a lot of similarities. And I loved the bit in the police station.
Yeah.
And that turning point.
How the hell that happened.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there'll be lots more stories to come over the next few years anyway. Maybe we'll have to do part 2.
Yeah, I'm starting to get more confident to share about what happened.
Yeah, well, it's great and it's lovely, and I know it will help some people listening. So thank you, and thank you for your time. And I'm sure we'll catch up very soon.
Thank you, Lou.
Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope it helped you in some way, and I really hope to see you back here soon. If you have anything to share on today's experience or podcast, please nip over to the YouTube channel or the Facebook group Trauma Thrivers and let us know there.